to start on this, and we got to about verse, I think verse 11, if I recall correctly. So in Galatians 4, I want to, I'm just going to read real quick what we looked at last time, and then we'll move on to verse 12. In Galatians 4, verse 1 beginning, it says, "Now I say that the heir, as long as he is a child, differeth nothing from a servant, though he be Lord of all." And again, in the previous chapter, it talked about the old law being a tutor to bring us to Christ, that Abraham's seed, Christians are Abraham's true seed. It says, "But is under tutors and governors until the time appointed of the Father. Even so we," talking about Christians and Christianity, "when we were children, were under bondage, under the elements of the world. When the fullness of time was come, God sent forth his Son, made of a woman, made under the law, to redeem them that were under the law, that we might receive the adoption of sons." Again, at just the perfect time in history, we talked about that last time, that Christ came into the world. Everything was set up. "And because ye are sons, God hath sent forth the Spirit of his Son into your hearts, crying, Abba, Father." And we talked about that term. Abba is another word for father, but it seems to be a very reverential, very sacred way that the Jews would utter the name of the Father. "Wherefore thou art no more a servant, but a son. And if a son, then an heir of God through Christ. Howbeit then, when we knew not God, ye did service unto them which by nature are no gods. But now after that ye have known God, or rather are known of God, how turn ye again to the weak and beggarly elements, whereunto ye desire again to be in bondage? Ye observe days and months and times and years. I'm afraid of you, lest I bestowed upon you labor in vain." So again, we see the same theme, and and we'll continue to see this theme through the next couple of chapters. Again, Paul is trying to emphasize to these Galatian Christians, they are no longer under the old law. They're not bound to keep the old law. And so these Christians, whether Jew or Gentile, the Jews had been under bondage to the law of Moses. The Gentiles have been in bondage to the world, to idolatry. They both have been delivered from that. So saying, why do you want to go back into another type of bondage? Why do you want to bind the old law on yourself? And so he's admonishing them not to do that. And so we looked at, we looked at 8 through 11, I think, the other day. And we looked at the idea of vain labor. So Paul says, is this possible for our labor to be in vain? And in this case, he's talking about his own labor in trying to teach and convert them. He doesn't want them to err and be lost. Again, showing the possibility that is a possibility to turn our backs on God and to turn our backs on the gospel. He's saying don't do that. I don't think we looked at this with you last time. B.W. Johnson wrote this. He said, "Howbeit then, these Galatian brethren had been idolaters and had worshipped idols which were not gods at all. At that time they knew not God, the true God, at all." It says, "But now, after that ye have known God, having learned the knowledge of the true God, or rather are known of God, God himself had sought them through the gospel and had offered them eternal life. They knew God because God had taken note of them and sent them the gospel." It says, "How turn ye again? How can they, known of God, caught from the bondage of those that are not gods, turn back again to bondage?" The bondage referred to is that of the law. They've been delivered from the bondage of idolatry, but were relapsing into another bondage. It says, weak and beggarly elements. Weak because they have no spiritual power to strengthen us. Beggarly because they have no rich promises like the gospel. Elements because they belong to a rudimentary condition, to an undeveloped state, to the childhood of the race. You observe days. We talked about this last time. These are specifications of how they were turning back to the Jewish law. And compared to Colossians 2:16, we showed y'all that last time. The days are the Jewish Sabbaths. The months are the new moons. The times are the Jewish festivals. The years are the sabbatical years. In observing these, there was legal bondage to an obsolete system. Again, they're no longer under that. Why are you binding that on these new converts, on these new Christians. And so again, that's the gist of that. All right. Any questions or comments on that before we go into the next verse, verse 12? All right. So the Galatians received Paul despite his infirmity of the flesh and temptation of his flesh, and would have plucked out their own eyes for him if possible. And we discussed that a pretty good bit in 2 Corinthians 12. We're not going to rehash all of that again with you, but we'll touch on that a little bit. It says, brethren, I beseech you, be as I am, for I am as ye are. You have not injured me at all. So saying by doing these things, you haven't brought injury to me. And the idea is you may be bringing injury on yourself by doing these. You know how through infirmity of the flesh I preached the gospel unto you at the first. So whenever he preached to the Galatians, whether it be the first missionary journey he's referring to or the second that he's referring to, Paul was having some physical ailment. And we'll talk more about that in just a minute. But notice their reaction to him. Apparently there's something that you could see and view, and they weren't embarrassed by this, and they received Paul, as you'll see here it says, in my temptation which was in my flesh, ye despised not, nor rejected, but received me as an angel of God, even as Christ Jesus. Where is then the blessedness ye spoke of? Okay, so why now are you alienating yourself from me? It says, for I bear you record that if it had been possible, you would have plucked out your own eyes and have given them to me. And 2 Corinthians 12:7 is, again, the cross-reference to this that we talked about. It says, unless I should be exalted above measure through the abundance of the revelation, there was given to me a thorn in the flesh, the messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I should be exalted above measure. And again, we speculated, and that's really all it is, as Brother Israel would say, it's an academic point. Again, it's a curiosity. It's an interesting point to me. What was his physical ailment? There's a lot of speculation that it was his eyes. Now again, B.W. Johnson will say the plucking out your eyes may just be a proverbial expression saying you would have done whatever you could have done to have helped me with this. And certainly that could be. And some have wondered, well, was it something with his eyes? Going back to the time where he had scales on his eyes when he was blinded by Christ. In this same book in Galatians 6:15, I think it says, you see how large of a letter that I've written, and most scholars think it's talking about the size of the print that he's writing. So was it some eye ailment? It really doesn't matter. Again, that's our best guess, I guess you would say, but I guess it could have been any ailment.
The light is so bright that when you're not supposed to look at a welder when it's going, because it'll ruin your eyes.
Right.
And he had that very bright light in his eyes before he closed them.
Right.
Did some damage to them.
Yes. It could have been a lifelong reminder of that experience that he had. Yes, Brother Bill, that's a great point. Here's what Brother Johnson says on these verses. It says, brethren, I beseech you, be as I am. It says literally, become as I am. Come to my ground is where brother. So come over to my side of this argument. Interesting the way that he put that. It says, for I am as ye are, whether I am become as ye are. He says, I gave up my bondage to Judaism, the religion of my fathers, and made myself as a Gentile to Gentiles. So he says, I changed the way that I'm living. He says, I'm asking you to change and be a Christian. Give up that.
Is that what he means when he says, I am as you are?
That's what Brother Johnson thinks. When I read that, I didn't really sink in my mind that that's what it said, but I thought that was an interesting comparison there. It says, you did me no wrong. My complaint against you is not on personal grounds. You have not wronged me. It says, you know how through infirmity, etc. He says the revision is clearer. Some fact not explained to us, but well known to the Galatians is referred to. It is implied that some physical weakness caused him to preach in Galatia the first time. Perhaps he was passing through and was stopped by an infirmity that prevented him from traveling. And Brother Johnson doesn't go into any speculation, which is probably the wiser thing. I probably get off into speculation on stuff like that too often. The first time. This implies he had preached there more than once. The Act speaks of 2 visits to Galatia, and again, the first journey, he went to Lystra, Derbe, and Iconium, which, as we said, could have been some of these churches of Galatia. In my temptation, which was in my flesh, the revision follows the best manuscripts. Your temptation, which was in my flesh. His infirmity is meant. It was probably some malady which hindered his work, might have disfigured him, became something with the appearance, and been a temptation to the Galatians to ridicule and despise him. Probably 2 Corinthians 12:7 refers to the same affliction. Both these allusions show that the infirmity was one that he severely felt. But the Galatians despised not nor rejected him on that account, but received him heartily, even as an angel of God, God's messenger.
Why would he infer it as a temptation, his infirmity was as a temptation?
That's a great question. And is he talking about a temptation for himself or for the Galatians? You know, so it might have been tempted to have ridiculed him or made fun of him or whatever. You know, I don't know. That's a great point, because you think of that being as a temptation for Paul, you know, being something to hinder him. But he seems to be saying that might have been a temptation to you, maybe to have rejected what I said or this sort of thing. Yeah, good question. It says, where then is his blessedness? They then congratulated themselves that Paul had come to them with the gospel. It says, I bear you record. So great was then their joy and sense of obligation that they could not do enough to show their gratitude. Why they would even have given him their own eyes, a proverbial expression denoting very strong devotion. So he doesn't read anything more into that than just saying they would have done anything they could have for him. Any questions on or comments through verse 15?
Coach, one thought is one of the things that may have caused his eyes to be, because you remember when God was talking to Moses, he said, no man can see me or they'll die. But Jesus had already ascended into heaven before Paul saw him. So was that glory just so bright at that point on him that it literally caused damage to his eyes from seeing him?
Very well may have. Very well. Good point. Good point. All right, verse 16. All right, Paul says that he has not become their enemy, but is very worried about their spiritual growth and condition. So he says, I'm not an enemy of yours. I'm the one that preached you the gospel. I want your best interest. I have your best interest in mind. Am I therefore become your enemy because I tell you the truth? So again, he's getting on them pretty hard here in the book of Galatians. I was thinking about that in comparison with the book of Romans. We discussed that before. There's so many similarities between those two books. In Galatia, Paul feels this very personally, it seems to me, because he preached to them, and that it almost hurt that they have left some things that he taught. Romans seems to be more a preventive thing. Again, he hadn't been to Rome, or preventing, maybe trying to head off this error that was spreading to other parts of the world, trying to keep it from spreading the church of Rome. It says, they zealously affect you, but not well. Yea, though they would exclude you, that you might affect them. But it is good to be zealously affected always, and a good thing, and not only when I'm present with you. My little children, of whom I travail in birth again until Christ be formed in you. He's saying, he's almost used the illusion of a mother. It says almost you got to be reborn again, almost the way that in Galatians 5 verse 4 is going to say, you that have gone back to the law, you have fallen from grace. It says, I want to form you again as a Christian. I desire to be present with you now and to change my voice, for I stand in doubt of you. Some words that says, I don't want to, kind of almost the same language used in the book of Corinthians. I don't want to get onto you hard. I don't want to have to be this stern with you. 1 Corinthians 4, 19 through 21, he had made a point like this to the Corinthian brethren. It says, but I will come to you shortly, if the Lord will, and will know not the speech of them which are puffed up, but the power. For the kingdom of God is not in word, but in power. What will ye? Shall I come unto you with a rod, or in love, or in the spirit of meekness? And he's saying to them, you know, I can be stern if I need to, but I don't want to. Seems to me he's kind of saying the same thing here. I want to change my voice. I don't want to be stern with you. I want to enjoy my company with you if and when I see you again. Charlie.
Well, in Romans 8:10 it says, if Christ be in you, the body is dead because of sin, but the spirit is life because of righteousness.
All right, good passage. Here's what Brother Johnson, I'm kind of relying on him on some of these to see what he said about this. The first phrase here, am I therefore become your enemy, etc. Then, when I first preached to you, you were so devoted to me, as the fact that I tell you the truth alienated you, it is probable that he refers to truth told in his second visit. They zealously seek you. The false Judaizing teachers are meant. They show great zeal for them, but they were not seeking their good. These that were trying to tell them to go back to the law of Moses, that would not be for their good. That would be to their harm, to their detriment if that occurred. They would exclude you from the great body of Gentile believers and bind you to their clique. It is good to be zealously affected. To exhibit zeal and feeling is a good thing. It was good to show this feeling when he was present with them. But now it was changed in respect of himself. It was only when he was present. My little children, he addresses them very tenderly as their spiritual parent. It says, of whom I travail in birth again. He is more than a father. He travails for them as a mother. He had done so when they were converted. He did not now again until they were so matured in Christ that they would cling to the gospel. I desire to be present. When present, they had shown warm feeling for him. He would, now that they were face to face, so that they could talk about these matters. To change my voice, to speak not severely, as a letter would sound, but tenderly. I stand in doubt, is perplexed by what he hears and filled with fears. And you can read that throughout these chapters, just kind of that Paul seems to be very taken aback, very surprised by how their conduct has been, how they have given in to some of these false teachers along that line. Okay, now this is an interesting passage to me, the last 10, 11 verses of Galatians 4. He has used earlier in this particular book, in Galatians 3, he talked about Abraham. And Abraham was a topic of his to the book in the book of Romans as well. Talking about Abraham as an example, as somebody saved before the law of Moses, and in fact in the book of Romans, at least a decade before circumcision even was put into place as a sign between God and Abraham's descendants. He now uses the first two sons of Abraham as an allegory or kind of a comparison between these two. Spiritually speaking, in the book of Romans, particularly Romans 9, he talks about a little bit about Isaac and Ishmael, talks about Isaac being the promised seed, that he was a seed for the children of the promise. And he's kind of making the same comparison here, and maybe one that would the Jews wouldn't have been fond of. We know that the Jewish people were descendants of Isaac's line, of Isaac and Sarah, and not Ishmael and Hagar. So that was their mindset. But it's interesting, in this particular comparison, he compares the Jews who were descendants of Isaac and Sarah to Ishmael and Hagar. It says that you holding on to the Jewish law, you are like Ishmael and Hagar, you're not the children of promise, and that Christians are the true descendants of Isaac and Sarah. It's a little bit of a complicated argument, but it's kind of an interesting one that Paul makes on this occasion. So Ishmael, the son of Hagar, is an allegory for the covenant from Mount Sinai, the law of Moses. Galatians 4:21. Tell me, so again, he's continuing this argument. You're not under the law. Ye that desire to be under the law of Moses, do you not hear the law? Don't you hear what the old law says? For it is written that Abraham had two sons. Of course, he had a total of 8, but he compares these first two, the sons of Hagar and Sarah. For it is written that Abraham had two sons, the one by a bondmaid, that is Ishmael, that was born of Hagar, the other by a free woman, Isaac, who was the son of Sarah. But he who was of the bondwoman was born after the flesh. But he of the free woman was by promise. Again, they're both biological sons of Abraham. That's not the point. But the idea that the descendants of Isaac were the children of promise. But again, the Jews were of those descendants. And so again, it's interesting that he takes the Jews and compares them to being children of the flesh as Ishmael was. It says, which things are an allegory. Again, kind of a story, a comparison here that he's using. For these are the two covenants. So it says, I'm using this as an example. I want to use Hagar and Ishmael, and I want to use Sarah and Isaac to make a comparison here. So these are the two covenants. The one from Mount Sinai, which gendereth to bondage, which is Hagar. For this Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia, and answereth to Jerusalem, which now is, and is in bondage with her children. So, like I said, it's kind of complicated to follow some of this right here. at least for me, may not be as complicated for you on some of this.
Now, which one's in bondage? Hagar's?
So he's saying, so Hagar being like a servant of Sarah, that she was in bondage. So he's saying that you Jews, those that are going back to Jewish law, you are like this. Even though you're descended from Isaac, you're kind of more in line with Ishmael and Hagar than you are with Isaac and Sarah, and going back to the old law. Again, it's an interesting comparison here. When he talks about answer to Jerusalem, which now is, he's talking about the church, in his in bondage were the children. So the Christians, talking about, in a sense, in bondage as far as being persecuted, is what he's talking about there, I believe, in that context. Now, going back and looking at some of this from the book of Genesis, Abraham's first son, Ishmael, was not the promised seed. And this, again, this is an interesting account too. And I don't guess, not that I blame Abraham, but it's almost like he felt like he had to help God out in this occasion. So God had promised him in Genesis 12, your descendants are going to be as the sand of the sea. And in Genesis 15, he made the same promise to him. And then Abraham is getting on up in age. So the first promise made to him when he's 75, he's now 86 years old. It's been 10 or 11 years, and I still don't have a son. And so it's almost like he feels like he needs to help God out on this occasion. So here's Genesis 15, verse 4 through 6. The context right here, y'all probably remember, is Abraham prays to God, or he makes a statement that, I guess, Eliezer is going to be my heir, his servant. So he had no biological children, so he thinks that one in his household, I guess that's going to be my heir. And so this is what God says to him. This, Eliezer of Damascus, shall not be thine heir, but he that shall come forth out of thine own bowels shall be thine heir. You are going to have a son, Abraham. So he's waited a while, says you are going to have a son. And he, God, brought him forth abroad and said, look now toward heaven and tell the stars, if thou be able to number them. And again, we can't. I think it's Psalm 147 verse 3 that talks about God can number the stars. That's mind-boggling to think about. We have no clue how many stars there are. God numbers them, and that passage says, and he calls them all by name. So God has a name for all the stars. So he brought him out and looked at the stars and said, look now toward heaven and tell the stars if I be able to number them. And he said unto him, so shall thy seed be. It'd be interesting today if you could calculate the physical heirs of Abraham. I guess it's incalculable. How many billions, it'd be interesting to know how many of the billions of people on earth today are descendants of Abraham. I guess no way to tell, but imagine a good chunk of the 7.8 billion people on the earth.
He's talking about Abraham, thought maybe you need to help God a little bit. But Sarah was in on that too.
Yes, that is true.
She was waiting for the promise.
That is true.
It hadn't happened. She said, well, maybe if you go into my bondmaid, that might be.
Yes. True. Good point, brother. Good point. It says, so shall thy seed be. And he believed in the Lord, and he counted it to him for righteousness. And we've read that before. In the book of Galatians, Paul quoted this same verse. In the book of Romans, he quoted that verse. Hebrews 10, 38 or 39, I forget which one, also quotes that passage. So in Genesis 16, as Brother Lloyd said, as a good point, wasn't just Abraham that felt like he needed help God, Sarah did too. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, bare him no children, and she had a handmaid, an Egyptian whose name was Hagar. Probably somebody that she had was given to her when they left Egypt in Genesis 12, when they had the confrontation there with Pharaoh. And Sarai said unto Abram, behold, now the Lord hath restrained me from bearing. I pray thee, going into my maid, it may be that I may obtain children by her. So it does seem to be her idea, brings it up first. And Abram hearkened to the voice of Sarai. And Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, to the Egyptian, after Abraham had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, so he'd be 85 at this point, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife. And he went unto Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her eyes. I've skipped a bunch of the passages right there, just for time's sake. In verse 15, Hagar bare Abram a son, and Abram called his son's name, which Hagar bare, Ishmael. And Abraham, by the time that Hagar was born, he was 86 years old when Hagar bare Ishmael to Abram. Down in chapter 17, again, I'm skipping ahead a little bit here, and this is, you remember this account, is where the three angels had come and talked to No, that's chapter 18. This is where God is speaking to Abraham in this context and telling him again that you're going to have a son. You and Sarah are going to have a son. And Abraham said unto God, oh, that Ishmael might live before thee. And God said, Sarah thy wife shall bear thee a son indeed. So again, Abraham now is thinking, okay, Ishmael is my promised seed. And God is saying, nope. So here, Abraham's 99 when this is going on. Oh, that Ishmael might live before thee. And God said, Sarah thy wife shall bear thee a son indeed, and thou shalt call his name Isaac. And I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant. Again, this includes you and I, and that's the point that Paul is making, is that Christians are the true seed. We're the children of the promise. It's not a biological thing, but we're the children of the promise in that respect. For an everlasting covenant, and with his seed after him. And as for Ishmael, I have heard thee. Behold, I will bless him, and will make him fruitful, and will multiply him exceedingly. 12 princes shall he beget, and I will make him a great nation. But my covenant will I establish with Isaac, which Sarah shall bear unto thee at this set time in the next year. So about this time next year, Sarah is going to have a son. You will name him Isaac. Again, he's shocked by this. Again, he had assumed Ishmael must be him. God says, nope, that's not the son of promise. That's interesting. I mentioned this before, and I don't want to delve into all this too. This is fairly new that this is even a controversy before. And I mentioned to y'all, every Bible map I've ever read when it talks about the Exodus always pictures Mount Sinai being down here. You always see it pictured there, and I always assumed that was just where it was. More and more, I'm reading more and more people that are questioning that. And this passage is kind of interesting because Paul does say Mount Sinai in Arabia. And you say, well, with the people of Paul's day, what would Arabia be? Well, they would have understood this as being Arabia also. They wouldn't have understood this as being part of Arabia. So Mount Sinai in Arabia. I never had really thought about that at all. And I shared some of this information with y'all before, I think. I bought a DVD. It was a really interesting documentary. A guy had gone looking for a lot of evidence of the Exodus and all, and where it would be. It just says they crossed the Red Sea, and it doesn't say where. Like, both of these are parts of the Red Sea. The main body of the Red Sea here, but these two fingers, the Gulf of Suez and Gulf of Aqaba. So again, every Bible map I've ever seen has it going through somewhere here. And perhaps that is the case. Perhaps that is the case. But there's more and more people wondering, did they actually cross right in here? There's a little peninsula, and when you look at the terrain that it mentions here, it's very similar to what it mentions in that account. On this part, on this finger, I think I showed you a little bit of the video there, is what the wooden chariot wheels that were on the Egyptian chariots would, of course, rotted after 3,500 years. That wouldn't be there anymore. But there are algae shapes in the shape of those wheels, which is very interesting. The algae would have attached itself to the wood, which rotted, but the algae seems to be in the shape of those wheels right there on that. Something else I did not know, some of y'all may have, but in this DVD it talked about that Solomon in his day had erected two like big pillars, supposedly where the Red Sea crossing was, where he thought it was, and he had those two pillars here and not over here. So that may not be. It may not be. And again, I'm not going to argue with anybody, and I haven't made up my mind yet either on that. But it's interesting that Paul calls it Mount Sinai in Arabia.
Well, when the Israelites wandered 40 years because they wouldn't go into the Promised Land, weren't they in the area around Mount Sinai in the wilderness?
I think so. It says they were in the wilderness wandering.
Which seems like it wouldn't have been the finger to the right, it would have been the Gulf of Suez, because they did that right after they came out of Egypt.
Right.
And if they crossed over to the other finger, they would have had to come back over to wander 4 years, but they don't.
Well, I guess it depends on where Sinai is. It talks about the wilderness. And to answer your question, Brother Lloyd, I don't know. You may be right about that. Again, probably I'm doing too much speculating here and even saying that. But I think, it talks about the area of Sinai. Well, we have called this the Sinai Peninsula. But if this was Sinai, they certainly would have had wilderness to wander through here too. Okay. So again, but I don't know. And I said, if y'all want to borrow that DVD from me sometime, I'd be glad to let you see that. But I found it interesting, and my mind is not made up one way or the other. But I never even thought about or considered First time I saw this was 4 or 5 years ago. And I was looking up something to put in my PowerPoint for my students at school. And I saw several maps like that. They had it drawn here. To be honest with you, I first thought it was Muslim propaganda, to tell you the truth, that they considered Arabia the Holy Land. So they're trying to put Mount Sinai in Arabia for Muslim purposes. But again, it's interesting to me that Paul calls Mount Sinai in Arabia. Again, I don't know if there's anything to that or not. But
looking on Facebook a lot here lately, there's just a lot of documentaries in there about archaeology's finds recently and past that proves a lot of things about
Yes.
the Bible.
yes,
That's interesting about those.
it is. And in this DVD, brother, it was also talking about, you remember there was the account of where Moses struck the rock and water came out. So there is a rock over on this side that looks kind of like there was a bunch of water that came, so again, I don't know. And it's, again, as Brother Israel says, academic, it really doesn't matter, but again, interesting to me.
We had a flood after all that, so it could
Yeah, true. That is true.
In Romans 9:8, it says that is they which are the children of the flesh, these are not the children of God, but the children of promise, are counted for the seed.
That's a good verse, Charlie. I think you got one of my cross references here in a minute. That's a good one. So again, here's that proposed site that some say they crossed at a place called Nuweiba, which there's a little peninsula that juts out here. And again, that's where they have seen a lot of these algae formations that are in the shape of wheels. But it may not be. I'm throwing that out there. This is another thing. Again, talking about Arabia. In Paul's day, what would they have called Arabia? And I found this map. Again, I was interested myself. So this is what they would have identified as Arabia. And again, they would not have included Sinai and Arabia. So again, I'm sharing that information with you. All right, Brother Johnson says. Yes, sir.
I don't know that there is, but is there any way of being able to tell exactly how far it was from bank to bank where they crossed?
Yes, brother. You would ask me that question, wouldn't you, Brother Scott? I remember seeing that in the DVD. What did they say? I'm going to say at that spot that they said they may have crossed, and I hate to even say because I may have this wrong, I'm going to say it said it's about a 7-mile crossing there. And they were talking about that. That's one thing they talked about that particular spot. The depth of it winds up going pretty far. So I said, well, could they have crossed? But it's almost like a gradual descent to the bottom, and then up, right, where it would seem like it would be. So if you were crossing that, where they think it would have been doable to have crossed. I've forgotten how deep they said it is at that the middle of that finger too.
And something always kind of confounded me. It said the water stood up on each side.
Yes.
You would have thought the low side would have flowed on down.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So,
yeah. That's one of those things. You wish they'd had video back in that day. You wish somebody had a cell phone taking pictures of that. Is that what's going on?
In the movies, I think that's the way they did it.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
Moses crossed it, showed the waters on each side.
Yes,
It
yes.
had to be an awfully long trek through there.
Yeah.
To get to have enough separation between Pharaoh and the Israelites, but I don't know. Forever, I kind of thought maybe it was a lot shorter than that, but then as I started putting it together, you would think that they would have had to gone quite a ways by the time Pharaoh's army got in there and started after them. So, I appreciate it.
Good point. All right, so Brother Johnson says, tell me ye that desire, etc. What troubled him was their tendency to accept the obsolete law of Moses. He now addressed all such a question. Will they hear the law itself? So again, it's interesting, he calls this the law, and there's some debate about where does the law of Moses start? Well, this is from Genesis, that this is this account, and he calls that part of the law of Moses, which is interesting. A bondmaid, Hagar, whose child was Ishmael. A free woman, Sarah, whose child was Isaac, was born after the flesh. The son of the bondwoman was born in the ordinary course of nature, just a natural son, was by promise. The son of Sarah was a child of promise, born when she was long past the age of bearing children. And we'll look at some of that in just a minute too. So that's the other thing that makes this miraculous, really, the birth of Isaac, in bringing this nation forth from Abraham and Sarah. It says, which things are an allegory. Though literally true, whereas these are true events, the facts had an allegorical interpretation. The two women and the children were types that Paul uses in this argument that he is making. Are two covenants. One, the bondwoman, represents the covenant given at Sinai, the covenant of bondage. The other, the free woman, represents the covenant of Christ, the gospel. For this Agar is Mount Sinai, represents Sinai. This Mount Sinai is in Arabia, the very home of Ishmael and his race. Some also add that one name of the mountain is Hagar, but this is not certain. He's saying, what Brother Johnson says, I've never heard this either too, but he said some people call the mountain, wherever this is, Mount Hagar. And he says he's not sure if that's the case or not. Answer 2, represents the earthly Jerusalem under bondage, bondage to the law herself, and also her children, as Hagar and her child were under bondage to Sarah, being a servant of Sarah's.
The Arabians, Arabs today are descendants of Ishmael.
Yes. Yep. So I've heard people talk about that. When you talk about all the trouble that Jews and the Arabs been having, we can thank Abraham and Sarah and Hagar for all of that, can't we?
She left that bond servant.
So Isaac, the son of Sarah, is an allegory for the Jerusalem from heaven, the church which is composed of the children of promise. So we are the children of promise, and in that sense, a descendant of Abraham and of Isaac. Verse 26, but Jerusalem which is above is free, which is the mother of us all. For it is written, rejoice, thou barren that bearest not, break forth and cry, thou that travailest not. For the desolate hath many more children than she which hath an husband. Now we, brethren, as Isaac was, are the children of promise. And it's hard to misunderstand that, isn't it? That we, Christians, we're the promised seed of Abraham. He made that statement in Galatians 3:29. He also made that statement, I think, in Romans 2:29. So we are those children. We're the children of promise, the spiritual seed of Abraham. The verse he's quoting right here is from Isaiah 54 and verse 1, which says, sing, O barren, thou that didst not bear. Break forth into singing and cry aloud, thou that didst not travail with child. For more are the children of the desolate than the children of the married wife, saith the Lord. Verse 5 says, for thy maker is thy husband, the Lord of hosts is his name, and thy Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel, the God of the whole earth shall he be called. And so, again, that's interesting that uses that comparison, that's the one that Paul quotes, because Paul talks about, in Ephesians 5, the church being the bride of Christ. And here it speaks of the Lord as being a husband to, in this case, the bride, or the church being the bride of Christ. So in a sense, the church is pictured as a bride, and then we're kind of also pictured as children of God as well. So Isaac, the son of Abraham and Sarah, was the promised seed, and read just a little bit of that account from Genesis 18. Genesis 18, 10 through 15. And he said, this is when the three angels had come to Abraham, as y'all remember the hospitality that Abraham showed them on that occasion. He said, I will certainly return unto thee according to the time of life, and lo, Sarah thy wife shall have a son. And Sarah heard it in the tent door which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old and well stricken in age, and it ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of women. And it's interesting, when you read the book of Romans, Romans 4, talks about Abraham being past the childbearing age as well. And of course, he was 100. But it's interesting, he seems to have had 6 more sons after Sarah died with Keturah, and he was 137 when Sarah died. So he seemed to have had more children later on. And even his father, some debate how old, whether Terah was 70 or 130 when Abraham was born. There were other, think of Jacob would have been 91 when Joseph was born. So you got some others like that about in his day that were very old too. But it seems that the implication is that Abraham himself was past childbearing age. And it makes you wonder if he was healed miraculously in some way. And then, but again, he apparently had 6 more kids after this as well. But Sarah was beyond, certainly beyond the childbearing years. Therefore Sarah laughed within herself, saying, after I'm waxed old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord being old also? And the Lord said unto Abraham, wherefore did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I of a surety bear a child, which am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the time appointed, I will return unto thee according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son. And it's another thing interesting in chapter 17, it says Abraham laughed too, kind of to himself, when he received that news. Questions, comments on that?
Sarah denied laughing, didn't she?
Yes, she did. I didn't laugh. In chapter 21, we see the birth of Isaac recorded. And the Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did unto Sarah as he had spoken. For Sarah conceived and bare Abraham a son in his old age, at the set time of which God had spoken to him. And Abraham called the name of his son that was born unto him, whom Sarah bare to him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac, being 8 days old, as God had commanded him. And Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born unto him. And Sarah said, God hath made me to laugh, so that all that hear me will laugh, or will laugh with me. And so Abraham's 100, Sarah's 90. So is where the birth is not just a natural birth. This is a God thing, as we might say. This was God intervening in this to bring about his people, his chosen people, the Jewish people were born, had a miraculous beginning. Kind of like in a sense you could say that, of course, Jesus had a miraculous beginning too, with the virgin birth, and in a sense that carries over to us too, the church being established through miraculous means. The idea of Jerusalem, which is above, being free, the mother of us all. Got a couple of cross references here I want to share with you. Hebrews 12, 22 through 24. But ye are coming to Mount Zion, unto the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, to an innumerable company of angels, to the general assembly and church of the firstborn. So the church is heavenly Jerusalem, is Mount Zion, the city of the living God, which are written in heaven, and to God the judge of all, and to the spirits of just men made perfect, and to Jesus the mediator of the new covenant, and to the blood of sprinkling that speaketh better things than that of Abel. It's interesting, all the comparisons makes there, the church being to Zion, heavenly Jerusalem, and all in that context. In 1 Corinthians 15, 24, it says, then cometh the end, when he shall deliver up the kingdom to God, even the Father, when he shall put down all rule and all authority and power. So showing that Jesus has the kingdom now. The church he's ruler of the kingdom now. Revelation 21, 2 through 4. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem. And we just saw the city, New Jerusalem, that's the church itself, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them, and be their God. And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow, nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. Beautiful picture. Their picture is New Jerusalem coming from heaven. Revelation 21, 10 through 12. And he carried me away in the spirit to a great and high mountain, and showed me that great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God, having the glory of God, and her light was like unto a stone most precious, even like a jasper stone, clear as crystal, and had a wall great and high, and had 12 gates. So we're talking about the church being spiritual Jerusalem. What a blessing that is. It shows how we're tied to heaven, our headquarters being in heaven, and our hope being in heaven when this life is over. Charlie.
Well, in Romans 10:15, it says, as it is written, how beautiful are the feet of them that preach the gospel of peace and bring glad tidings of good things.
Well, that's right, Charlie. It is glad tidings. It's good news. And it's sad, he says in the next verse, that they have not all obeyed that gospel. And that's sad too. Thank you for your good attention and good comments. Look forward, Lord willing, to continue this next Sunday.